I never thought I would tell this story. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never imagined I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. It's 6 in the morning in New York City, and I'm sitting on the cold floor of Grand Central Terminal, hugging an empty suitcase. My name is Grace Peterson. I am 68 years old, and 3 days ago, my own daughter abandoned me in this country as if I were a piece of trash she no longer wanted to carry. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixes with the scent of donuts from the nearby stand, but my stomach has been rumbling since yesterday. I have no money. I have no documents. And the cruelest part of all, I have no one to miss me in this big world that has suddenly become so small. I watch people pass by with their rolling suitcases, their phones glued to their ears, speaking in that fast-paced New York accent that I've had so much trouble understanding these past few days. Everyone is in a hurry. Everyone has a destination. Everyone has someone waiting for them somewhere. I only have this wool scarf I found on a bench in Central Park, which I now use as a pillow against this tiled wall that is becoming my home. How did I get here? I ask myself that question every 5 minutes, like a broken record that won't stop playing in my head. It all started 3 months ago, in my little house in San Antonio, when the phone rang while I was watering my patio geraniums. It was Jessica, my only daughter, the little girl I raised alone after her father left for a 20-year-old when she was barely 5. "Mom, I have a surprise for you," she said with that sweet voice she used as a child when she wanted me to buy her ice cream. "Would you like to see New York?" My heart stopped. New York, the city of my dreams ever since I was a young girl reading Hemingway in my town's library. New York, the place where our ancestors had supposedly landed, that distant place that had always been just a fantasy for a retired teacher with a pension that barely covered the month's groceries. "New York, sweetie? Really?" I asked, feeling as if I'd been given a second chance at life. "Yes, Mom. Mark and I are going on a work trip to the city. We thought it would be nice if you came with us. You deserve it, after everything you've done for us." Mark, her husband of 5 years, an engineer who had always treated me politely, but with a coldness that made me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own home when they came for Sunday dinner. But in that moment, even he seemed like an angel for thinking of including me. "But honey, the ticket must cost a fortune." "Don't worry, Mom. We just need you to help with a small part. Your pension for this month, for example. We'll cover the rest. It's our gift to you. My entire pension. $1,800 that I treasured each month, dividing every dollar between food, my blood pressure medication, gas, and electricity. But it was New York. It was my dream. And it was my daughter, inviting me to share something special with her for the first time in years. Of course, sweetie. I'm so happy to contribute. Those 3 weeks of preparation were the most exciting I'd had in decades. I took my passport out of the drawer where it had been sitting since I got it years ago, hoping to one day travel. I bought a small suitcase at the local flea market, navy blue with little white flowers. I got my hair cut at Rose's salon and even bought 2 new blouses at the market. The night before the trip, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up looking at pictures of New York online, imagining myself walking through the Met, eating a slice of real New York pizza, listening to live jazz in a club. For the first time in many years, I felt important. I felt loved. I felt like my life was worth something. But everything changed at the San Antonio airport. I was standing in the check-in line, nervous but excited, when I heard Mark talking on the phone a few feet ahead of me. His voice sounded annoyed, frustrated. "Yeah, I know it's a problem. What did you want me to do?" If I told her she couldn't come, she would have started crying and pulling her usual drama. "Look, we'll take her, show her around for a couple of days, and then we'll leave her to figure it out on her own. She wanted to see New York, right?" My blood ran cold. I thought I had misheard, that my hearing wasn't what it used to be. But then I heard the words that broke my soul in two. "Why does the old lady have to come anyway? She's just going to complain about everything. It's a work trip, not a senior citizens tour. Just shut up, I know how she is. She plays the victim and ends up in tears. We brought her along so she wouldn't bother us from back home. We'll just drop her off and let her fend for herself." I was 3 steps away from him. Just 3 steps. and I heard every word as if it had been branded onto my chest. Jessica was beside him, nodding. My daughter, to whom I had given everything, nodding along as they planned to abandon me like a stray dog in a city I didn't know. The flight was the longest torture of my life. 5 hours of pretending I hadn't heard anything, smiling when they offered me peanuts, asking like an excited tourist about what we would see first in the city. But inside, something had shattered, something I knew would never be the same. And now I'm here, on the floor of this station, remembering how 3 days ago they told me they had booked a lovely hotel for me in the Lower East Side so I could rest while they did work things. How they kissed my forehead as if I were a little girl before getting into a taxi. How I discovered the address they gave me didn't exist. That the prepaid phone they bought me had no SIM card. And that in my suitcase, there was nothing but a note scribbled on an airplane napkin. "You're on your own, old lady." Enough with the emotional blackmail. An elderly woman with a kind Eastern European accent approaches and offers me a bottle of water. Her eyes hold a kindness I no longer recognized in anyone. "Are you all right, dear?" And for the first time in 3 days, I cry. I cry like I haven't cried since the day my husband left. I cry for the daughter I lost, for the trust that died, for the 68-year-old woman who is learning that sometimes family can be the most dangerous place in the world. But I also cry because deep in my broken heart, something tells me this story is just beginning. 4 days have passed since I first set foot in New York, and with every passing hour, I feel as if I'm reliving my entire life in slow motion. Sitting here, on this bench in Central Park, where I've taken refuge each morning because it's the only place where no one looks at me strangely for having nowhere to go, my mind keeps returning to all those moments when I believed I was building something beautiful with my daughter. I close my eyes, and I can perfectly see our little house in that quiet San Antonio neighborhood. The 2-bedroom house I bought working double shifts at the elementary school, teaching in the morning and selling Tupperware in the afternoons. The walls were painted a pale yellow, Jessica's favorite color when she was 8. "Like the sun, Mommy," she'd say, helping me paint with her little hands that got more paint on herself than on the wall. How many times did I mortgage that house to pay for her education? 3 times. The first was when she wanted to go to the private high school where all her friends went. I was making maybe $3,000 a month as a teacher, and the tuition was $1,500, but my girl wasn't going to be less than anyone else. "Mom, all my friends' moms have new cars and pick them up from school. I'm the only one who takes the bus," she complained when she was 16, with that way of making me feel guilty that she had already perfected. I sold my gold earrings, the only ones my mother had given me before she died. I sold them to buy her her first pair of brand-name shoes, those Nikes that cost $150 and fell apart after 3 months. But she was happy, and to me, that was worth all the gold in the world. The second mortgage was for college. Jessica wanted to study communications at USC, one of the most expensive universities in the country. "But all the important executives' kids go there, Mom. That's where I'll make connections for the future," she explained with a confidence that could convince me of anything. On top of my classes, I started selling homemade sandwiches and cookies to the other teachers during lunch breaks. Waking up at 5 in the morning to prepare everything. My hands smelled permanently of onions and bread, but every dollar I earned was a dollar closer to my daughter's dream. "Mom, I need a laptop for school," she told me during her first semester. "I can't be the only one without my own computer." $1,200 that I got by taking a loan from the teacher's credit union. A year of paying $100 a month straight out of my salary, but my girl wasn't going to fall behind because of me. The third mortgage was the most painful. Jessica graduated and got a job at an advertising agency, but her salary wasn't enough to live on her own. Apartments are so expensive, Mom, and I need to be in a decent neighborhood so people don't think I come from a poor family. I paid the down payment on a condo in a trendy part of the city, $20,000 that I got by mortgaging the house, the only thing I had in the world, for the 3rd time. But my daughter no longer lived with me, no longer filled the house with laughter and music. The house fell silent, but my heart was full because I knew she was okay. 2 years later, she met Mark at a company party. From the first time she introduced him, I knew something had changed in my daughter. She didn't tell me things like she used to. She didn't stay to watch our favorite shows with me on Sundays anymore. She didn't ask me to make her favorite enchiladas. Mark says living alone has made me more independent, she explained when I asked why she barely came to see me anymore. He says women need to be self-sufficient. But when they got married, of course they needed my help. The wedding had to be perfect, dignified. What a woman of her status deserved. $3,000 for the dress, $2,000 for the venue, $1,000 for the flowers, $1,500 for the photographer. I only get married once, Mom. I want it to be memorable. I sold my wedding ring, the only physical memory I had left of the first happy years with her father, before everything turned sour. I sold my living room set, the furniture I had bought piece by piece over 5 years. I even sold my Singer sewing machine, the one that had been with me since Jessica was a baby, and I used to make all her clothes by hand. But my girl looked beautiful on her wedding day, radiant, happy, and when she hugged me after the ceremony and said, "Thank you for making the happiest day of my life possible," I felt that all the sacrifices had been worth it. Then came the years of stabilizing their marriage. The honeymoon trip to Cancun they needed to start off right. My entire $1,000 Christmas bonus. The furniture for the new apartment they rented because it wasn't appropriate for a newlywed couple to live in such a small place. $3,000 from a loan I was still paying off when they abandoned me here. You understand, Mom. We're just starting our life together and we need the basics. It's not fair that we have to wait years to have a decent life. And I understood. I always understood. Because I saw in my daughter's eyes the same hunger I had when I was young. That desire to be someone important, to not settle for the little that life gives you if you don't fight for more. But something was starting to make me uncomfortable in those conversations. Mark was always there when Jessica asked me for money, but he never spoke. He just nodded, as if giving her permission or approval for what she was asking. And when I took the money out of my purse, he would look at me in a certain way, as if it were natural for me to pay, as if it were my obligation, my function in their lives. "Your mom is so generous," he would say to Jessica in front of me, but there was something in his tone I didn't like. As if generous was another word for stupid. On Sundays when they came over to eat, Mark would sit in my favorite chair, the one by the window where I liked to read. He never asked if it bothered me. He just took it, as if it were his. And Jessica never said a thing. Mark likes that spot because he can see the TV and talk to us at the same time, she explained when I mentioned very gently that it had been my chair for 15 years. Slowly, my Sundays became strange. I cooked, I served, I washed the dishes, but the conversations were between the two of them. They talked about places they had gone without inviting me, people they didn't introduce me to, plans they made without consulting me. "So how was work this week, sweetie?" I'd ask as I served her more chicken and rice. "Fine, Mom. The usual," she would reply without looking up from her plate, and then immediately turn to Mark. "Did you tell your boss about the Dallas project?" And I would be left standing there, holding the serving spoon, feeling as if I had asked an inappropriate question, as if my attempts to know about my daughter's life were annoying intrusions into her new existence. Here, on this bench in New York where I now live, I can see everything with a clarity I never had before. Every dollar I gave them, every sacrifice I made, every time I sold something important to me to give them what they considered necessary, I wasn't building a stronger relationship with my daughter. I was buying little moments of her attention. I was paying to remain included in her life. I was financing my own place in her world, without realizing that that place was getting smaller and smaller, no matter how much money I invested to keep it. A pigeon lands near my feet and pecks at the crumbs from the bread a woman at the shelter where I've been sleeping gave me yesterday. I watch it and think that even this pigeon has more dignity than I do. It doesn't pay anyone to exist. It doesn't need to buy love with sacrifices. It simply is, and that's enough to deserve the crumbs it's given. For the first time in my life, I understand that I should have been enough too, without having to pay to be loved. It's been 6 days since they left me in New York, and this morning, while waiting for the doors to open at the St. Francis Church where they've been giving me breakfast, I received a call that made me realize that what I thought was the bottom of my pain was actually just the beginning. It was the voice of my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, from San Antonio. She sounded nervous, like when she has to deliver bad news. Grace, honey, I don't know if I should be telling you this, but I saw some men at your house yesterday, in uniforms, and Jessica was there with her husband. My breath caught in my throat. What kind of uniforms, Eleanor? From the bank, Grace. From the bank. And there were papers. Lots of papers. I hung up the phone and just stood there on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, watching people walk to their jobs, to their normal lives, while my world finished crumbling from a continent away. It wasn't just abandonment. It was theft. It was a betrayal planned months in advance. But what hurt the most wasn't the money. What was killing me inside were all those forgotten birthdays, all the times I was sick and no one asked how I was, all those Sunday afternoons I spent waiting for a call that never came. My 66th birthday, 2 years ago. That day I got up early, dressed nicely, bought a single cupcake from the bakery, and waited. Waiting for the phone to ring, for a knock on the door, for someone to remember that Grace Peterson had been born on March 15th, and that maybe she deserved at least a happy birthday. Nothing. At 8 at night, when I had lost all hope, I called Jessica myself. Oh, Mom, I completely forgot. Mark and I are just so swamped with the apartment renovation. Have you seen the pictures I posted on Facebook? I hadn't seen any pictures. I didn't have Facebook. I didn't know how to use those things. But I pretended I had so my daughter wouldn't feel worse. Yes, sweetie, it looks beautiful, right? Mark has such great taste in decor. He says our home has to reflect our professional status. Professional status. While I was eating a cupcake alone in my kitchen, with a single candle I lit for myself because no one else was going to. I'll make it up to you next week, okay, Mom? I'll take you out to eat somewhere. That makeup dinner never came. When I reminded her 2 weeks later, she said it had been a really tough week at work and we should just do it the following month. And the month of my next birthday, my 67th, she didn't even forget. She just didn't care. She sent a text message at 11 at night. Happy B-Day, Ma. Hope you have a good one. Hope you have a good one. As if I had gone to a party full of people who loved me, instead of sitting in my living room, watching TV and trying to convince myself that it didn't matter, that I was too old to be expecting celebrations. But what hurt the most were the illnesses. All the times my body broke down and I was left alone, taking care of myself as best I could, with no one to ask if I needed anything. The pneumonia last year. 5 days with a high fever, coughing until my ribs ached, unable to get out of bed. I called Jessica on the 3rd day because I was getting scared, because I didn't even have the strength to go to the store for medicine. Are you sure it's pneumonia, Mom? Sometimes you exaggerate when you get a cold. Exaggerate. Me, who had worked sick half my life so I wouldn't miss my classes, who had never stayed in bed even when I had Jessica, exaggerated. I'll come see you tomorrow, okay? Mark and I have a dinner with his bosses tonight and I can't cancel. Tomorrow came, but she didn't. She called me on the phone. Oh, Mom, my day got so complicated. Are you feeling better? I wasn't feeling better. I felt worse. But I told her yes because I had already understood that my illness was an inconvenience to her perfect life. I ended up in the hospital, alone. The doctor who treated me asked if I had family, because she needed someone to be responsible for my medication and post-hospital care. Yes, doctor. I have a daughter. Would you like us to call her? I was silent. How could I explain to that doctor that my daughter was too busy building her new life to worry about the woman who had sacrificed everything to build hers? That's not necessary, doctor. I can manage on my own, and I did manage on my own, as I had my whole life. But that night, in the hospital bed, hooked up to an IV and listening to the beeping of machines, I understood something that broke me more than any diagnosis. My daughter no longer needed me, but I couldn't keep needing her either. Now, sitting on the cold floor of this room in the shelter where they have given me temporary refuge, I can see the full pattern of my abandonment. It didn't start here in New York. It started years ago, gradually, subtly, like a plant that dries out so slowly you don't notice until it's completely dead. The phone calls that got shorter, the visits that became more spaced out, the questions about my life that ceased to exist. I became an accessory in my daughter's life, something that was there when she needed it, but didn't deserve attention when it wasn't useful. How was your week, Mom? stopped being a real question and became a polite formality before getting to what she really wanted: money, favors, help with something. And I, like an idiot, thought that if I made myself more useful, more generous, more available, I would get back the daughter I had lost without even realizing it. Last night, here in New York, I had my first real breakdown since I arrived. I was in the shelter's communal shower, with that soap that smells like disinfectant and water that runs lukewarm if you're lucky. And suddenly, I couldn't bear the weight of everything I had lost. It wasn't a dramatic cry. It was something worse. It was as if all my muscles had decided to give up at the same time. I sat on the shower floor and let the water pour over my head while my body trembled uncontrollably. 68 years. 68 years building a life, raising a daughter, being a good person, keeping my promises, sacrificing for others. And my reward was to be naked in a strange bathroom, in a country that isn't mine, abandoned by the one person in the world who should love me unconditionally. One of the shelter volunteers, a young woman named Sarah, knocked on the door. "Grace, are you all right?" I couldn't speak. I didn't have the voice to lie and tell her I was fine. Because I wasn't fine. Because maybe I had never been fine, and I was only just now realizing it. Sarah came in and found me there, curled up in a ball under the water, shaking like a lost child. "Oh, honey, come here." She helped me stand up, wrapped me in a towel, and for the first time in days, someone treated me with the tenderness I had given my daughter for 40 years, and that she had never returned. "You know what, Grace?" she said as she helped me dry my hair. "Sometimes the best people suffer the most. But they're also the ones who have the most strength, even if they don't realize it. I don't feel strong, sweetie. Of course you don't. Because you've just been betrayed in the cruelest way possible. But look at you. You're here, breathing, fighting, surviving. A weak person doesn't do that." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the room I share with 4 other women who have also lost everything for different reasons. One is here because her husband beat her. Another because she lost her job and her house. Another because her children kicked her out of the family home when she was widowed. We are all women who at some point trusted someone who failed us. We are all learning that sometimes family can be the most dangerous place in the world, but we are also learning that we can survive without them. This morning I woke up different. Not happy, not healed, but different. For the first time in 68 years, I don't have to worry about anyone but myself. I don't have to pretend I'm okay when I'm not. I don't have to smile when I want to cry. I don't have to be the perfect mom, the available grandmother, the woman who always has money for others' emergencies but never for her own dreams. For the first time in my life, I am just Grace. And maybe that's enough. 3 days after my breakdown in the shower, once I had started to get used to the ritual of communal meals and the sound of other women crying at night, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was Jessica. Her voice sounded desperate, broken, so different from the calculated coldness with which they had abandoned me that for a moment I thought that maybe, just maybe, she had come to her senses. "Mom, where are you? We've been looking all over New York for you. The hotel told us you never checked in." I remained silent, holding the phone with trembling hands. Around me, the other women in the shelter were starting to wake up, whispering their good mornings as they prepared for another day of survival. "Mom, are you there? Answer me." "I'm here, Jessica. Thank God." "Mom, there was a terrible misunderstanding. The address we gave you was wrong, and the phone we bought you had signal problems. We've been frantic." Misunderstanding. The word hung in the air like a lie so big that even she seemed ashamed to say it. "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, feeling something cold and hard settle in my stomach. "Yes, Mom. A terrible mistake. But everything is sorted out now. Where are you? We'll come get you right now." For the first time in a week, I felt something like hope. Maybe I had misjudged the situation. Maybe it really had been a mistake, a series of unfortunate coincidences that had created this nightmare. "I'm at a shelter, sweetie." In the East Village. Silence. A long, heavy silence that made me understand that the word shelter had painted a picture in her mind that she did not like at all. A shelter? What kind of shelter? "For homeless women, Jessica. Another silence. Longer this time. Mom, why didn't you call us sooner? Why didn't you look for us? And there it was. The blame, shifting back to me, as always. As if I were responsible for my own abandonment. As if I had chosen to sleep on the floor of a train station. The phone didn't have a SIM card, sweetie, and the address you gave me didn't exist. I know, Mom, but you could have gone to the police, the consulate, anywhere. Not stayed on the street like a… She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what word she had been about to say. Like a homeless person. Like a crazy person. Like an embarrassment to her perfect new life. An hour later, they arrived at the shelter. I had already showered, put on my best blouse, the only one that wasn't wrinkled from sleeping in it, and tried to fix myself up as best I could in the small communal bathroom mirror. Jessica entered first, and her face was a map of emotions I couldn't interpret. Horror, shame, disgust. She wore enormous sunglasses that covered half her face, and a dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent in San Antonio. Mark followed behind, looking at everything with that expression you get when you walk into a place you consider beneath you. His shoes shone like mirrors, and his gold watch reflected the fluorescent lights of the place in a way that seemed almost violent. Mom, how could you end up in a place like this? Was the first thing Jessica said, without hugging me, without asking how I was, without truly apologizing for what had happened. I had no choice, sweetie. I had no money, nowhere to go. But Mom, Mark interjected with that voice he used when explaining something he considered obvious. You had your credit card. You could have used that for a hotel. My credit card. The one that had been canceled 2 months ago because I couldn't make the minimum payment after giving them the money for the trip. But of course they didn't know that. Or maybe they did. The card is canceled, Mark. They looked at each other. One of those couple's glances that says everything without words. A silent conversation that completely excluded me. As if I were a problem to be solved and not a person who had just lived through the worst trauma of her life. Well, Jessica said finally, the important thing is we found you. Let's get out of here. But something in her tone alerted me. It didn't sound like relief. It sounded like resignation. In the taxi on the way to their hotel, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I was sitting in the back between them, but I felt more alone than when I was sleeping at the shelter. Mom, Jessica began without turning to look at me, we need to talk about a few things. Here it comes. I knew it. The conversation that would turn my rescue into a new form of abandonment. We've been thinking that maybe it would be best for you to go back to Texas. Go back? Already? But we just got here a week ago. Yes, but Mom, we have work commitments here. Important meetings. And frankly, after what happened, we don't think it's safe for you to be alone in a city you don't know. Not safe. As if I were the one who had created the dangerous situation. Besides, Mark added, turning to look at me for the first time, the hotel we're staying at only has 2 beds. And with our work schedules, we wouldn't be able to take care of you like you deserve. Take care of me. As if I were a troublesome pet that required constant supervision. We arrived at the hotel, an elegant place in Midtown that made me feel as if my wrinkled clothes and messy hair were a personal affront to the decor. The lobby had more marble than I had ever seen in my life, and the people passing through were dressed as if they were going to meetings with world leaders. They took me to their room, a suite overlooking some important park, with a separate living area and a bathroom bigger than my kitchen in San Antonio. There were fresh flowers in expensive vases, and a bottle of champagne waiting on a glass table. Sit down, Mom. We need to sort this out. I sat on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than my monthly salary when I was working, feeling like an intruder in my own daughter's life. Look, Mom, Jessica began, sitting across from me but not too close. We've been talking, and we think it's best if you fly back to Texas tomorrow. But sweetie, I came to spend time with you, to see New York with you, and I'm so sorry, Mom. But circumstances have changed. We have a very important meeting the day after tomorrow that could change Mark's career, and we can't be distracted. Distracted? I was a distraction. And can't that meeting wait? Can't we just sightsee together for one day? Mark cleared his throat, the way he does when he's about to say something he considers very important. Grace, with all due respect, I don't think you're understanding the magnitude of this professional opportunity. This could mean we get to stay and work in Europe permanently. It's our future that's at stake. Their future. Never our future. Never your future too, Mom. Besides, Jessica continued, frankly, Mom, we're a little upset. Upset? With me? Yes, Mom. With you. How could you go to a shelter instead of getting help? Do you have any idea how we would have felt if something had happened to you? And there it was, the complete reversal of reality. Somehow, my abandonment had become my fault. My survival had become an offense to them. You put us through some terrible days, Mom, thinking something bad had happened to you, imagining you'd been robbed or kidnapped. You have no right to put us in that situation. I had no right. I, the woman who had given them everything, had no right to be abandoned without complaining in silence. I'm sorry, kids. I didn't mean to worry you. Well, it's done now, Mark said with that voice he used when ending a conversation. We've already bought your return ticket. You leave tomorrow at 2 p.m. You already bought the ticket? Without asking me? Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is, Jessica pleaded. We understand you're disappointed, but sometimes things don't go as planned. As planned. As if I had planned to be abandoned. That night, on the rollaway bed they put for me in the suite's living room, I heard them talking in low voices in the next room. I couldn't hear all the words, but the tone was clear. Annoyance, impatience, a desire for me to be gone as soon as possible. At some point in the early morning, I heard Jessica say, next time we go on a trip, we're not telling her anything. This was a mistake from the beginning. And there, lying in a strange bed, in a strange city, with a plane ticket that had been bought without my consent, I understood something that changed everything. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been exactly what they had planned from the beginning, to bring me here to get me out of the way, to abandon me so I couldn't interfere with their plans. And when things got complicated, they rescued me not out of love, but out of convenience. For the first time in my life, I saw my daughter exactly as she was, a stranger who shared my blood but not my heart. And for the first time in my life, it didn't hurt as much as it should have. The next day, while Jessica and Mark slept late in their king-sized bed, I got up with the first light of dawn and made the most important decision of my 68 years. I was not getting on that plane. I sat on the suite's balcony, watching New York awaken below me, and for the first time in decades, I didn't think about what my daughter needed, what would be best for her, how I could fix things so everyone was happy but me. I thought only of myself. And what I thought was this: Grace Peterson is not going to run back to Texas with her tail between her legs. She is not going to pretend this was a misunderstanding. She is not going to continue being the convenient mother who appears when needed and disappears when she's in the way. At 7:30, when I heard them moving in the bedroom, I went in and found Jessica checking her phone while Mark showered. Honey, I need to talk to you. Oh, Mom, you're already awake? The flight isn't until 2. You could have slept more. I'm not taking that flight. She looked up from her phone for the first time. What do you mean you're not taking the flight? You heard me. I'm not going back to Texas. I'm staying in New York. She stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Mom, you can't stay. Where will you live? On what money? I don't know yet. But that's my problem, not yours. Mark came out of the bathroom just then, hair wet and a towel around his waist. What's wrong? You sound upset. Your mother-in-law says she doesn't want to leave. Grace, what's gotten into you? We talked about this yesterday. You can't stay here. Of course I can. I'm a free woman. I have a passport. I can stay in the U.S. wherever I want. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. They looked at each other with that panicked expression they got when something was out of their control. Mom, is this about what happened? Is this your way of punishing us? Punishing us. As if my survival were an act of revenge against them. It's not a punishment, Jessica. It's a decision. For the first time in my life, I'm going to do what I want to do. And what is it you want to do, exactly? Mark asked, with that condescending voice he used when talking to people he considered irrational. See New York. Like we originally planned. Like it should have been from the start. But Mom, we can't go with you. We already told you we have work commitments. I don't need you to go with me. In fact, I'd rather go alone. The silence that followed was so thick you could chew it. Jessica got up and started pacing, just like she did as a child when she didn't get what she wanted. This is ridiculous. Mom, you don't know New York. You don't have enough money to be a tourist. I'll learn. And as for the money, I'll manage. How will you manage? Are you going to live in shelters your whole life? If I have to. For the first time since they had come to rescue me, I saw real fear in my daughter's eyes. Not fear for my well-being, but fear for what a vagrant mother in New York could mean for her. Mom, think about this. What will people say when they find out you're living like a what, Jessica? Say it. Like a homeless person. Like a crazy old woman. Like an embarrassment to your perfect image. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. It's been written all over your face since you showed up at the shelter yesterday. Mark got dressed quickly and approached me with that important man posture he adopted when he wanted to intimidate someone. Grace, I understand you're upset, but this is getting out of hand. You can't stay in New York on a whim. A whim? You call my desire to see the city I spent my entire month's pension on a whim? We already put that money back, Jessica said quickly. It's already in your account. Is it? Call the bank and ask them. She fell silent, because we both knew there was no money in any account. Look, Mom, she said finally, if you like New York so much, we can plan another trip. Next year, when we have more time. Next year. Like all the promises she had made me for the last 10 years. Like the meal she was going to bring me when I was sick. Like the call she was going to make on my birthday. Like the quality time we were going to spend together when things calmed down. No, Jessica. I'm here now, and I'm going to see New York now. At 11 in the morning, after 2 more hours of circular arguments, veiled threats, and feigned pleas, I did something I had never done in my life. I left the hotel without saying goodbye. I simply took my small suitcase with the little white flowers, went down to the lobby while they were in the room arguing about what to do with me, and walked out onto the street. New York greeted me with bright sunshine and a crisp air that smelled of freedom. I walked aimlessly for hours, stopping at every square, every church, every little shop that caught my eye. I bought a city map at a newsstand and marked with a pen all the places I wanted to visit. The Met, the MoMA, Central Park, the Statue of Liberty, Chelsea Market. For the first time in a week, I wasn't in a hurry. I didn't have to be anywhere at any time. I didn't have to please anyone. I didn't have to pretend I was okay when I wasn't. I didn't have to be grateful for scraps of attention. I went into a small cafe near Times Square and ordered a coffee and a pastry. The waitress, a young woman with a friendly Brooklyn accent, gave me a genuine smile. You a tourist? Yes, but not the kind of tourist I thought I was going to be. She laughed, not fully understanding but not judging either. Well, enjoy the city. It's a place that'll steal your heart. And as I ate that pastry, which tasted of cinnamon and new beginnings, I understood something that filled me with a peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in decades, nobody knew where I was. Nobody was waiting for me at home. Nobody had plans for me that weren't my own. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. After the coffee, I walked to Central Park. I sat by the big pond, watching families row boats, children chase pigeons, and young couples take pictures under the trees. An elderly woman, about my age, sat on the bench next to me. She had a book in her hands. Excuse me, I said. Do you know of a place one could stay that isn't too expensive? Are you traveling alone? Yes. And it turns out it's the first time in my life I've ever done anything alone. How brave, she said with a smile that touched my heart. Listen, I know a guest house near the Lower East Side, run by a woman from Puerto Rico. Her name is Maria. Maria, a name of hope. It's called Maria's Guest House. Ask for Maria Sanchez. Tell her a friend from the park sent you. That afternoon, carrying my suitcase with the little white flowers, I knocked on the door of Maria's guest house. A woman in her 50s, with a kind face and strong hands, opened the door. Maria, a friend from the park sent me. Oh, what a joy! Come in, come in! Where are you visiting from? San Antonio. No kidding. I'm from Ponce myself, but I've been here 20 years. So, what brings you to New York? I paused for a moment, thinking about how to summarize the disaster of my life in a sentence that didn't sound too dramatic. I came to see New York and ended up having to learn to see myself. Maria looked at me with those eyes that women have when they've lived long enough to understand that sometimes the best stories begin with the worst tragedies. Well, welcome to New York, my friend. You'll be right at home here. And for the first time in a week, I believed someone was telling me the truth. That night, in my small room with a window overlooking an inner courtyard full of plants, I wrote on a napkin the first words of what would be my new life, day one of my freedom. Today, I decided not to run back. Today, I decided that Grace Peterson is worth more than the scraps of love she had been given. Today, I decided to stay. And for the first time in decades, I slept through the night without waking up worried about anyone but myself. I woke up early at Maria's guest house to the sound of sparrows chirping outside the open window. The air smelled of fresh bread and coffee, a scent so homey that for a moment, I thought I was back in San Antonio. But when I opened my eyes and saw the ceiling with its water stains and the old curtain moving gently in the city breeze, I remembered I was no longer in my house, my state, or my previous life. I was in a completely new place, with a freedom that scared me as much as it excited me. I went downstairs with my small suitcase and found Maria in the kitchen. She was pouring coffee into mismatched cups and placing a basket full of pastries on the table. "Good morning, friend. Did you sleep well?" she asked with a frank smile. "Like I haven't slept in years," I replied, and I felt I wasn't exaggerating. It had been a long time since I had rested without fear of my daughter's calls asking for money, without the anxiety of always being available for everyone but myself. We sat down for breakfast together, and between sips of coffee, she told me her story. She came to New York over 20 years ago with 3 small children and a husband who left her soon after for another woman. She worked cleaning houses, caring for the elderly, scrubbing floors, until she saved enough to open that humble but lively guest house. Her voice had that tone of weariness mixed with pride that only women who have survived worse blows than I was facing possess. "You don't come here looking for pity, Grace," she said, splitting a pastry and buttering it. "You come here to start from scratch, and you give me the impression that you have nothing left to lose." Her words hit me hard. It was true. I had lost everything. But at the same time, that loss gave me a new power. I could no longer be threatened by what could be taken from me, because the essential had already been snatched away. And yet, I was still alive. The following days, I dedicated myself to walking through New York like a pilgrim, searching for something I couldn't yet name. I discovered the musicians in Washington Square Park, the hustle and bustle of Broadway, the paintings I had seen so many times in books now before my eyes at the Met. I would spend hours looking at Washington crossing the Delaware, thinking about that mix of invisibility and prominence I had felt my whole life, always serving someone else, always supporting scenes where I was not the central figure. Every step taught me something. At Chelsea Market, I tasted cheese-stuffed olives and remembered how little I had allowed myself to enjoy small pleasures, because I was always saving for others. In Central Park, I saw elderly women walking arm in arm with their friends, laughing like teenagers, and I wondered how many laughs I had stolen from myself by being busy solving my daughter's life. In a secondhand bookstore, I found a used copy of a Hemingway novel and couldn't resist buying it with the few dollars I had. It was like reconnecting with the young woman who dreamt of adventure in the dusty aisles of my town's library. At night, I would return to the guest house exhausted, but with a glowing heart. Maria would greet me with a plate of hot soup and always had a story to share. About her guests, her childhood in Ponce, the loneliness she learned to transform into companionship. There, I also met other women staying temporarily. A Colombian woman who cleaned offices, a Romanian woman looking for work as a caregiver, a young Mexican woman who had come as an au pair and ended up escaping from an exploitative family. We all carried scars, visible and invisible, and that united us. One day, while we were chatting in the kitchen, the young Mexican woman told me, "Doña Grace, you should write your story. What happened to you is no small thing. There are many women out there who need to hear it so they don't feel so alone." The idea surprised me. Me, a retired teacher, always used to teaching from textbooks and blackboards. What could I possibly contribute now? But that same night, sitting in my room, I took a notebook Maria had lent me and started to write. The words flowed out like a river dammed up for decades. I wrote about my childhood, about the sacrifices for my daughter, about the abandonment in New York, about the strange mix of pain and freedom I was experiencing. As I wrote, I felt I was reclaiming my voice, the one I had silenced so many times so as not to inconvenience Jessica. One morning, coming down for breakfast, I saw a flyer tacked to the guest house wall. Volunteers needed to teach literacy classes to immigrant women. Lower East Side Community Center. My heart skipped a beat. The teacher still living inside me woke up instantly. I asked Maria for directions, and that same day, I went. The community center was a modest place, with brightly colored walls and a constant buzz of children and women. I was greeted by Sarah, the same young volunteer who had helped me at the shelter days before. When she saw me, her eyes widened as if she'd found an old friend. "Grace!" She hugged me tightly. "It's so good to see you here. Are you here to help?" I nodded. And within minutes, I was in front of a group of Moroccan and Latin American women who wanted to learn to read and write English. Their eyes shone with the same longing for opportunity I had seen in my students back in San Antonio. I taught them to form letters in notebooks, to pronounce simple words, to write their names for the first time, and when one of them managed to write her full name, her eyes filled with tears. I cried too, because in that moment, I knew I still had so much to give, that I wasn't finished, that my life still had a purpose. I returned to the guest house each afternoon with a new energy. My steps were no longer those of a defeated woman, but of someone who was learning to rebuild herself. And the funny thing was, the more I gave to those women at the community center, the more I gave to myself. I felt the hole my daughter had left was slowly being filled with the affection and gratitude of people who hadn't known me before. Not everything was easy, of course. Money was tight. I lived on just enough, what was left of my pension that I had managed to transfer with Maria's help, plus a few extra hours they gave me at the center in exchange for helping organize workshops. But every dollar I earned felt like a victory. I no longer depended on my daughter's crumbs or Mark's condescension. It was mine, the fruit of my labor, my hands, my voice. One afternoon, I received a text from Jessica. "Mom, how are you? Mark says you should come home soon. You're safer back in Texas." I read it over and over, waiting to feel that old need, that impulse to reply quickly so as not to lose her attention. But no, this time I left her on read, because I understood her concern wasn't for me, but for the discomfort my being away, out of her control, caused her, and I was no longer willing to be controlled. Instead of replying, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Today I discovered that silence can also be an answer." And as I did, I felt an immense peace. I no longer needed explanations. I no longer needed apologies. I no longer needed my daughter to validate my existence. The days turned into weeks, and every corner of New York became part of my rebirth. The Brooklyn Bridge reminded me of the strength that could still stand after centuries of struggle. The Hudson River, with its calm current, taught me that even waters that seem small keep flowing without stopping. The narrow streets of the Lower East Side, full of different accents and colors, made me feel that I was not alone in my foreignness, that we are all strangers somewhere, and yet we find community. One evening, returning to the guest house, I found Maria waiting for me with a letter in her hand. It was postmarked from Texas. I immediately recognized my daughter's handwriting. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I held steady. I went up to my room, sat on the bed, and opened it with trembling hands. "Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this. You're putting us in a very difficult position. People are asking about you, and we don't know what to say. Please, come back. I need you to understand that your place is with your family, not in a strange country doing things that make no sense." I read the letter several times, but I didn't cry. Instead of pain, I felt a new clarity. Jessica was never going to understand. To her, I would always be an accessory in her life, something that should be conveniently available. But I was no longer willing to be that object. And what surprised me most was realizing that, for the first time in my life, I didn't need her understanding to move forward. I put the letter in a drawer and locked it. Not to forget it, but as a reminder of what my past had been and what I would no longer allow in my future. That night, I slept soundly, and in my dreams, I saw myself walking alone on an unknown beach, leaving footprints in the sand that the sea slowly erased. But I wasn't afraid of them being erased, because as long as I kept walking, there would always be new footprints to leave. The days turned into a strange calendar, marked not by family obligations, but by small personal victories. Every morning I left the guest house with a crumpled map in my purse, determined to cross off a new corner of the city. I didn't have much money, but I learned to enjoy what was free. Walks along the Hudson River, the street performers in the subway stations, the farmers' markets where tasting a piece of cheese or a sip of cider was an invitation to chat with strangers. I never imagined that at 68, I would learn to walk alone without feeling lost. In San Antonio, every step I took depended on someone else. On my daughter's schedules, on calls from the school, on favors the neighbors asked of me. Here, every step was my own. And that feeling, which at first filled me with vertigo, slowly transformed into a source of strength. At the community center, I continued teaching reading and writing. A Dominican woman named Fatima, who always arrived with a bright blue headscarf and timid eyes, one day took my hand after writing her first complete sentence. "My son is named Kareem." Her fingers trembled as if she had just climbed a mountain. I trembled too, but with emotion. In that moment, I realized that teaching wasn't just a job. It was an act of love that gave me back more than I gave. Sarah, the young volunteer, started inviting me to meetings with other retired teachers who collaborated on different projects. One afternoon, in a small room that smelled of chalk and coffee, I found myself surrounded by women of different ages, many of them New Yorkers, others from Latin America, all with the same spark in their eyes, the conviction that we could still be useful, that we could still leave our mark. I felt that I finally belonged to a group that didn't see me as a burden, but as a valuable resource. Routine gave me confidence. I learned how to navigate the subway, to understand the rapid-fire accents, to distinguish neighborhoods just by looking at the fire escapes and the graffiti. New York was no longer a foreign city. It was becoming an improvised home. And although the memory of my daughter still stung, it hurt a little less each day. It was like a wound that at first bleeds uncontrollably, but slowly heals, even if it leaves a scar. One Sunday, I decided to attend a service at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I'm not particularly devout, but I wanted to give thanks somehow for being alive, for having endured. The solemnity of the place overwhelmed me. Between the columns and stained glass windows, I knelt and closed my eyes. I didn't ask for anything. I just said, "Thank you, because I am still here," and I felt a weight lift from my chest. That same afternoon, upon returning to the guest house, I found Maria talking to a man in a suit at the door. He was a journalist looking for immigrant stories for a feature on older women reinventing themselves in New York. When he heard me talk about my classes at the community center, he asked for an interview. I hesitated because my whole life I had been accustomed to staying quiet about what hurt. But something inside me told me that maybe it was time to speak. The interview was published a week later in a local online journal. The headline read, "Retired Texas Teacher Helps Immigrant Women Read in New York. It's Never Too Late for a New Beginning." There was a photo of me smiling shyly, holding a notebook. Seeing it, I cried, not from sadness, but from surprise. There I was, Grace Peterson, becoming an example of something positive and not someone's inconvenient shadow. The story spread further than I imagined. Some people started seeking me out at the community center to thank me or just to meet me. An American woman my age gave me an embroidered handkerchief saying, "You remind me of my mother, who was also left alone and managed to rebuild her life." That gesture moved me to my core, but the most unexpected thing was receiving a call from the Mexican consulate in New York. They had read the article and wanted to invite me to participate in a cultural event as a representative of older immigrant women contributing to the community. Never in my life had I been invited to anything other than to serve, cook, or provide money, and now they were asking me to speak about my experience, my strength. The event was in a simple but elegant room, with Mexican and American flags on the walls and folk music playing in the background. They handed me a microphone and my hands were sweating, but when I started to speak, the words came out on their own. I told my story without embellishment: the abandonment, the betrayal, the loneliness, but also the hope, the rebirth, and the certainty that it is never too late to start another life. When I finished, the room rose in applause. I saw tears on the faces of strangers and understood that my pain, when shared, was transformed into something useful for others. That night, back at the guest house, I received a text from Jessica. Short, almost cold. Saw your picture online. I can't believe you're airing our private life like this. You're embarrassing me. I didn't reply. I no longer needed her approval or feared her rejection. I put the phone away and poured myself a glass of inexpensive wine I'd bought at the market. I toasted alone, but I didn't feel lonely. The following days were even more revealing. Some of the women at the community center started calling me Mrs. Grace, not just out of respect, but because they said I gave them hope, that my way of teaching made them believe they could achieve anything. No title had ever honored me so much. Winter was approaching, and New York was filling with holiday lights. I walked down Fifth Avenue in a coat borrowed from Maria, and felt that those lights, though not meant for me, were illuminating my path too. In the shop windows, I saw families buying gifts, and for a second, it hurt to imagine my daughter doing the same in Texas without a thought for me. But I immediately told myself, you are not lost, Grace. You are finding yourself. One afternoon, Sarah took me to a special gathering at the center. It was a small party to thank the volunteers. There was music, simple food, and laughter. At one point, one of the coordinators stood up and said, "We want to give special recognition to a woman who, in a short time, has become an inspiration to us all. Mrs. Grace, thank you for reminding us that it's never too late to give or to receive." They handed me a bouquet of flowers and a symbolic certificate. The room applauded, and I could barely hold back my tears. I couldn't remember the last time someone had said thank you to me without an implicit reprimand or obligation attached. That night, when I got to my room, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Today I confirmed that I don't need to go back to have a home. I carry my home inside me, and as long as I am alive, I can build it anywhere." And so, each day in New York stopped being an escape from my past and became the construction of a future. And although the wound from my daughter still hurt, it no longer bled as it once did. Now, it was a scar that reminded me I had survived. The December chill started to set in. I wasn't used to that icy wind that cut through scarves and gloves as if they were nothing. In San Antonio, winter was mild, almost a respite after the hot summers. Here, in New York, my hands chapped and the nights grew long. But I didn't complain. Every shiver was also proof that I was alive, enduring in a place I had learned to make my own. Maria taught me how to make a hearty beef stew that warmed the body and soul. She said that long simmering stews are like life. They need patience, time, and a lot of love, even if your bones ache from waiting. I liked listening to her as she stirred the pot. It was like listening to an older sister reminding me that pain is tamed slowly, just like tough beans that eventually become soft after hours of simmering. I continued to write in my notebook every night. I wasn't doing it with any thought of publishing, but as a release. However, one day Sarah told me, "Grace, your words have power. You should share them." I laughed, thinking she was exaggerating, but the idea stuck in my head. What if my story could help other women who had also been abandoned, deceived, or used by those they loved most? What if my pain could become a voice for those who were still silent? At the community center, they started inviting me to lead small creative writing workshops, not just teaching how to read, but how to narrate simple experiences. What a day in their childhood was like, how they came to the United States, what memories they wanted to leave for their children. I discovered that we all had buried stories, and that writing them was like exorcising ghosts. Sometimes we cried together, sometimes we laughed, but we always felt lighter after each class. One Friday afternoon, I received another letter from Texas. This time it wasn't from Jessica, but from a former colleague at the school where I had worked my entire life. She told me that some of the parents had read the article about me online and were moved. They said they couldn't believe that Mrs. Grace, the one who taught so many of their children to read, was now so far away and starting over. They sent their regards, memories, and thanks. Reading those lines, I realized something I had never wanted to admit. My value did not depend on my daughter. I had left a mark on many other people who did appreciate it. Winter continued. The roasted chestnut carts appeared on the street corners, and the sweet smoke reminded me of the county fairs of my youth. I would walk through the crowds, and although I was alone, I no longer felt invisible. I had recovered something I thought I had lost: the dignity of being. One day, Sarah surprised me with an unexpected proposal. "We're organizing an event for International Women's Day. We want you to be one of the keynote speakers." "Me?" I laughed in disbelief. "I'm just an old woman who's surviving." "No, Grace, you're a woman who inspires." I accepted with fear. Public speaking wasn't new to me. I had done it hundreds of times as a teacher, but this was different. I wasn't going to give a lesson on grammar or history. I was going to open my heart in front of strangers. I prepared for weeks, writing drafts in my notebook, rehearsing in front of the mirror, crying when the words hurt too much. The day of the event, the room was packed. Women from different countries in varied clothes and with different accents gathered to listen to one another. When it was my turn, I walked onto the small stage with my legs shaking. But as soon as I took the microphone and saw the attentive eyes before me, the fear transformed into a kind of ancient strength that came from deep within. I spoke of my life in Texas, of my sacrifices for Jessica, of the cruel abandonment in New York. I spoke of the loneliness, of the tears on the station floor, of the days in the shelter, of the shame and the anger. But I also spoke of rebirth, of writing, of teaching, of how hope can bloom even among ruins. When I finished, the silence was so profound that I thought no one had understood. But then the applause began. Some shouts of encouragement, women hugging each other. Several came up to me afterward to say, "The same thing happened to me. I was also left behind. Thank you for putting it into words." That night, I understood that my story was no longer just mine. It belonged to all of us. When I returned to the guest house, I found Maria waiting for me with a proud smile. "You see, Grace? You think you're alone, but you're planting seeds everywhere." She hugged me tightly, and for the first time, I felt that the void of the absent mother I carried could be filled, not by Jessica, but by the family that life was giving me in this new country. The following weeks were a whirlwind. I was called from another center to give motivational talks to older women. A small local publisher asked for permission to print excerpts from my notebook in a community magazine. Even a young journalism student wanted to write her thesis on my experience as an example of resilience in old age. I could hardly believe it. My whole life, I had been someone else's shadow. And now, at the end of the road, it was my turn to shine with my own light. However, the ghosts didn't disappear completely. One afternoon, while reviewing my notes, I received an unexpected video call. It was Jessica. Her face looked serious, with dark circles under her eyes and a look of discomfort. "Mom, we need to talk." My stomach clenched. Part of me wanted to hang up. Another part needed to listen. "I'm listening. I don't understand why you're doing all this. You're embarrassing us. Mark is furious. He says what you're telling people is damaging his reputation." I took a deep breath. Before, I would have made excuses. I would have apologized. Not this time. "I'm not telling anything that I didn't live through. And if your reputation depends on silencing me, then it's not worth much." "You're being unfair," she shouted. "Everything we did was for your own good." "No, Jessica. Everything you did was for your own convenience. And if it had truly been for my good, I wouldn't be rebuilding my life alone today." I saw a flash of shame in her eyes, but she quickly covered it with coldness. "I can't talk about this anymore. I just wanted to tell you to stop being part of our public life. Don't worry. I've already understood that I'm not part of your life at all. And that's okay." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I didn't cry. It was like closing a book that had hurt me for years. I didn't need to keep rereading those pages. That night, in my notebook, I wrote, "Today I let my daughter go. Blood connects, but it does not bind. True love is not begged for. It is given or it is not. I choose to give it where it will be received." The next day, when I walked into the classroom at the community center, The women greeted me with hugs and smiles. One of them, a woman from Honduras with a sweet gaze, told me, "Mrs. Grace, you are like a second mother to us." And I understood that, although I had lost one daughter, I had gained dozens. Winter ended, and with spring came the cherry blossoms in the park. I walked under the trees as petals fell on my coat and made myself a promise. I would never again allow someone else to define my worth. I might be poor, I might be old, I might be far from my home state, but I was free, and freedom was the greatest gift life had given me after so much pain. Spring welcomed me with a gentle breeze and colors that seemed painted just for me. The magnolias began to bloom, and the public squares filled with people playing guitars, children chasing giant bubbles, tourists stopping at every corner to take photos. I also carried my little camera, one of those disposable ones I'd bought at a cheap store. I wasn't looking for perfect memories, just the feeling of capturing moments that proved I was still alive. At the community center, my role began to expand. I was no longer just the impromptu teacher helping a few women write their names. Now they were asking me to coordinate entire groups. At first I hesitated, thinking I might not be up to the task. But Sarah looked me in the eye and said, "You were born for this, Grace." I accepted, and with every class, every laugh, every new word learned, I became more convinced she was right. I was born to teach, to accompany others on their journeys, to lift up those who thought they couldn't. And along the way, without realizing it, I was lifting myself up. One day, after class, a young woman approached me. She was about 20, from Ecuador, and she cleaned houses for a living. She showed me a notebook filled with crooked sentences, the handwriting shaky but firm. "Look, ma'am, I wrote this thinking of you. Thank you, because now I believe my life can change." I didn't know what to say. I hugged her and felt that gesture was worth more than any recognition, more than any applause. It was the fruit of having endured, of not having taken that flight back, of having stayed despite the fear. At the guest house, the nights turned into conversations. Maria would cook a dish from her home in Puerto Rico, and the tenants would share stories around the table. One woman spoke of her children left behind in Peru, another of her sick mother in Romania, another of a lost love in Morocco. I would listen in silence, but at some point, they would inevitably ask me to tell my story. At first, I did it with shame, as if my daughter's betrayal were a stain I had to hide, but I soon understood that speaking was also a form of healing. Every time I spoke the truth, the weight on my chest grew lighter. It was on one of those nights that Maria said something that stuck with me. "Look, Grace, family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes life gives you another one, made of affection and shared struggles. And you have one here now." From then on, I began to see them all as a kind of tribe. Women with nothing in common and, at the same time, everything in common. Abandonment. The need to start over. The will to never give up. The Mexican consulate called me again. This time it wasn't just for a cultural event, but to propose that I collaborate on an integration program for older adult immigrants. They wanted me to share my experience with other newcomers, to show that it was possible to survive and reinvent oneself. I accepted with pride. When I stood before that group of tired and distrustful faces, I felt like I was speaking to the me of months ago, the one who arrived with an empty suitcase and a shattered heart. And I wanted to tell her, with all the strength in my voice, "You are not finished. You are just beginning." While my life was transforming in New York, my relationship with Jessica was reduced to silences and reproaches. I would occasionally get curt messages, asking if I was still there, hinting that I should come back. They never apologized, never showed affection, and though it hurt at first, I began to accept it as part of the new reality. I had lost my daughter, but I had regained something more valuable, myself. One afternoon in May, Sarah invited me to a literary cafe where several women were reading their writings aloud. I hesitated to participate, but she encouraged me so much that I ended up bringing my notebook. When it was my turn, I read a fragment of what I had written. They left me in a train station as if I were trash, but there I discovered that even trash can bloom if it finds fertile ground. When I finished, the audience stood up and applauded. I saw tears in the eyes of women I had never met before. That night, I confirmed that my story was not a source of shame. It was a seed. Summer approached, and with it, new opportunities. I was offered a small stipend to coordinate regular workshops at the center. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover my basic expenses without depending on anyone. That money, earned with my own effort, tasted like victory. Every dollar was a reminder that I could support myself, that my value wasn't in what others decided to give me, but in what I was capable of building. However, not everything was easy. There were nights when the memory of Jessica hit me with full force. I would dream of her as a little girl, of her small hands stained with paint as we painted the walls yellow together. I would wake up with tears and a lump in my throat, but I no longer ran to seek comfort in calls or letters. I would hug myself and repeat in a low voice, "Grace, you are still here, and that is enough." One Saturday, walking through a street market, I found an antique stall selling old jewelry. Among the necklaces and rings, I saw a pair of pearl earrings identical to the ones my mother had given me, which I had sold years ago to please Jessica. I held them in my hands and my heart pounded. They didn't cost much, but I still hesitated. Did I deserve to treat myself? The answer came on its own. Yes. I bought them. When I put them on, I looked at myself in a tarnished mirror and saw someone different. Not the abandoned woman, but the one who gave herself the gifts no one else would. That small gesture became a symbol of my rebirth. Every time I wore them to teach, I remembered that I had regained not only my dignity, but also the right to give myself gifts, to love myself without expecting anything from others. The months passed, and my name became more well-known in the small circle of immigrant women. Some sought me out just for advice. One of them told me, "You taught me that it's not too late to start dreaming again." That sentence stayed with me, because deep down that's what I was doing. Dreaming again, but this time for myself, not for others. When summer arrived, New York filled with tourists and sweltering heat. But news also arrived that the community center wanted to open a pilot program in a nearby city, and they proposed that I coordinate it. Hearing the proposal, I felt fear. Was I capable? Wasn't it too much for me? But then I remembered all the steps I had already taken, and understood that yes, I could, that I always could, as long as I was willing to try. I accepted. And so, my life, which had begun as a shipwreck in a cold station, was turning into an unexpected journey, full of new harbors. On the hot July nights, I would sit by the window of my room in the guest house, the warm air caressing my face. I would look at the stars and think how ironic it all was. My daughter had abandoned me here to get rid of me, and in doing so, had unwittingly given me the chance to be reborn. The anger had turned into gratitude, not towards her, but towards life, for showing me that even from the greatest pain, something beautiful could grow. And with that certainty, I would fall asleep peacefully, knowing that every day I woke up was a day one, a new day to continue writing the story of Grace Peterson, the woman who learned too late, but just in time, that it's never too late to start over. The summer ended with a warm breeze that seemed to want to hold me on every corner of New York. The crowded cafes, the children playing in the fountains, the tourists with their crumpled maps, it all blended into a background music that accompanied my steps every day. I had learned not to walk in a hurry, to stop and notice the details: a balcony full of geraniums, a guitar playing in the village, the smell of freshly baked bread from a narrow alley. It was as if every corner of the city spoke to me in a language that needed no translation. You belong here. My work at the community center intensified. The new pilot program I had been invited to lead started in a nearby town, and I traveled by train twice a week to coordinate it. At first, having so much responsibility intimidated me, but every time I saw the women smile as they wrote their first sentences, all fear vanished. They reminded me of myself, that Grace, who once thought she was finished and who now found reasons to get up with excitement. It was on one of those train trips that I met Isabel, an older woman who sat next to me with a book in her hand. I noticed it was a collection by Langston Hughes, one of the poets who had made me dream of a bigger world in my youth. I couldn't help but comment on it, and soon we were talking as if we'd known each other our whole lives. She turned out to be a retired literature professor with an infectious energy. When I told her my story, she listened attentively without interrupting, And at the end, she said, "Grace, your life is a novel, and you have to write it, not just in a notebook. You have to leave it for others." Her words stayed with me like a seed. That very night, at the guest house, I opened my notebook and wrote on the first page, "This will be my book." I didn't know how or when I would finish it, but the decision was made. I would not be silent anymore. The days filled up with activities. Between classes, talks, and short trips, I barely had time to dwell on the past. But when I did, it no longer hurt in the same way. Jessica still sent curt messages from time to time, some with reproaches, others just silent inquiries. I no longer expected anything from those words. I would read them, breathe, and move on. I had learned not to let them chain me again. One afternoon, Sarah came to the center with a huge smile. "Grace, do you remember the journalist from the women's event? She published an article about you in an international magazine." I couldn't believe it. She showed me the magazine on her tablet, and there was my name, next to a photo of me in front of a whiteboard with the quote, "It's never too late to be reborn." I felt a mix of embarrassment and pride, but above all, gratitude. What had once been a source of humiliation was now becoming an example for others. The impact was unexpected. I was invited to participate in a panel discussion on older women and resilience. I remember, as I walked onto the stage, looking at the lights and thinking of that Grace who cried alone in Grand Central Terminal. I never would have imagined getting here. When I spoke, I did so with a calmness that comes from having nothing left to lose. I said that age is not a sentence, that loneliness doesn't mean death, that abandonment is not the end. I saw heads nodding, eyes full of tears, and hands clapping with sincerity, and I felt light. At the guest house, Maria hugged me when I returned. "My friend, what you are doing is great. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That word, great, echoed in my mind for days, because I had always been made to feel small, invisible, a nuisance. And now someone was telling me I was great. Meanwhile, in my classes, I began to teach the women not just to read and write, but to tell their own stories. I asked them to write down memories, longings, fears. Some could barely form words, but the emotion with which they did it filled the room with life. A woman from Morocco wrote, "My dream is for my children to look at me with pride." A woman from Bolivia wrote, "I am not useless. I just need a chance." And as I read their words, I understood that the strength was not mine alone, but belonged to all of us. One day, I received an unexpected call from the consulate. They wanted to nominate me for an honorary recognition for my community work. I was speechless. Me, the same woman who had been called an old lady and abandoned as a burden, was now being recognized. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both at once. Slowly, I also started to have small personal joys. One afternoon, walking through Central Park, an older man sat next to me on a bench. He was a widower, a New Yorker, a lover of poetry. We talked for hours about Frost, about Dickinson, about life. It wasn't the start of a romance, but a sincere friendship that reminded me I could still laugh with someone without feeling judged. Every time we met, I felt a little younger. In September, with the start of autumn, the community center organized an exhibition of texts written by the students. They asked me to include excerpts from my notebook as well. I hesitated, but finally agreed. Seeing my words hanging on the walls, read aloud by other women, was one of the most intense experiences of my life. They left me like trash, but I learned that even trash can bloom. A young woman read in a clear voice, and the whole room applauded. That applause wasn't just for me. It was for all who had ever been discarded. In the midst of all this rebirth, I received one last letter from Jessica. It was short, almost cold. "Do what you want, Mom. Just remember that you don't abandon family, even if you think otherwise." I closed my eyes after reading it and smiled, because I understood that, in reality, she was the one who had abandoned our family, and I had only chosen to survive. I no longer felt resentment, just a kind of quiet distance. I no longer expected anything, and that absence of expectation was, finally, freedom. Autumn progressed with golden leaves falling on the sidewalks. One morning, leaving the guest house, I lifted my face to the sun and took a deep breath. I had no fear, no hurry, no chains. It was me, Grace Peterson, standing in a city that no longer felt strange. And I found myself smiling for no reason. Just because I was alive and that was enough. In my notebook that night I wrote, "Pain brought me here, but hope sustains me. I no longer walk around looking for where I belong. I walk knowing that I belong to myself." Winter caught up with me again in New York, but this time it didn't find me helpless in a station or trembling in a shelter. It found me different, stronger, more aware of who I was. I learned to walk under the rain without fear, to enjoy the holiday lights without feeling excluded, to make hot chocolate in the small guesthouse kitchen and share it with the others as if we were an improvised family. The cold was no longer an enemy. It was a reminder that I had survived the greatest cold of all, the human coldness of abandonment. At the community center, we continued to grow. The pilot program in the nearby city had been so successful that they now wanted to replicate it in other neighborhoods. I became a kind of mentor for the younger volunteers. They asked for my advice, asked how to keep the students from giving up, how to maintain patience when the words wouldn't come. I answered from experience. It's not about teaching letters. It's about teaching that life goes on, even when it hurts. And they would all nod, as if those words were a mirror for them as well. One afternoon, as we were organizing materials, Sarah put a hand on my shoulder and said something that made me cry without warning. "Grace, you don't just teach. You remind us that it's possible to start over at any age." I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her. Because sometimes language isn't enough to explain the gratitude we feel. The honorary recognition from the consulate arrived in January. They called me for a simple ceremony, but to me, it meant the world. They handed me a certificate and a symbolic medal. I listened as they read a summary of my story aloud. A woman from Texas who, after being abandoned, found a new purpose in New York through community education. As I listened, I remembered the napkin on which my daughter and her husband had written that cruel phrase, "You're on your own, old lady." And I thought, yes, I am on my own. And now I am standing here, more alive than ever. That night, I walked back to the guest house with the medal tucked in my purse. It wasn't gold or silver. It had no material value. But for me, it was the symbol that all my suffering had not been in vain. I went into my room, looked at myself in the mirror with my pearl earrings, and recognized myself. I was no longer the broken woman from before. I was someone reborn. The book I had started writing began to take shape. Isabel, the retired professor I met on the train, helped me edit and organize chapters. She insisted that my story needed to be out in the world. We spent hours reviewing sentences, cutting repetitions, choosing titles for each part. I wasn't seeking fame. I just wanted to leave a testament, a beacon for other women who might be in darkness at that moment. The community publisher was interested in printing it. I never imagined seeing my name on a cover. When I held the first copy in my hands, the tears flowed freely. We decided on the title together, Hope at the Station, because there, in that place where I was thrown away like trash, the seed of everything that came after was planted. The book launch was humble, at a neighborhood bookstore. I thought few people would come, but the room filled up. Women from the community center, neighbors, volunteers, even strangers who had read about me in the magazine. They asked me to read a passage. I opened the book and my voice trembled at first, but it soon grew steady. They left me with an empty suitcase, but I learned that emptiness is not the end, but the space where something new can enter. When I finished, the applause was so intense it felt as if every clap was mending a piece of my heart. That same night, I received an unexpected message from a Texas number. It wasn't Jessica. It was my eldest granddaughter, Chloe. She was just 16. "Grandma, I saw your book online. I didn't know everything they did to you. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I want to see you someday." That message broke me and healed me at the same time. I replied with trembling hands, "I love you, sweetie. I'll be here whenever you want to find me." For the first time, someone from my own blood was acknowledging me without conditions. The following months were full of activities. I was invited to schools, associations, even a small local radio show. I wasn't paid much, but each experience enriched me in a way money can't measure. Every time I told my story, a woman would approach me afterward to say, "I went through that too." And I understood that the real triumph wasn't in medals or books, but in that human connection forged through shared pain. The memory of Jessica still appeared sometimes, like a distant shadow, but it no longer hurt the same way. I saw her as part of my past, not my present. The resentment faded, leaving only a scar that reminded me how strong I had become. I no longer needed reconciliation to move forward. My peace didn't depend on her, but on myself. I welcomed my second winter in Spain, standing tall, on the guest house's small rooftop patio, looking at the city lights. I thought about the Grace who had arrived broken and alone. I thought of all the times I was about to give up, and then I looked at my surroundings. Friends, projects, a published book, a granddaughter who wanted to find me. I smiled with serenity. Every tear had been worth it. One cold February morning, while pouring coffee for the others in the kitchen, Maria said, "My friend, you're no longer a guest at this guest house. You are part of my family." And I knew it was true, because family can break you, but you can also choose a new one, made of sincere affection. And I had found it here, in an unexpected corner of the world. That night I wrote in my journal, "My name is Grace Peterson. I survived the cruelest abandonment, but I discovered that life always gives second chances, and I chose to take them." I fell asleep peacefully, with a calm heart, knowing that although there were still chapters left to live, this had been the most important one, the rebirth. The second year in New York unfolded before me like a blank canvas. Every day I felt that the woman who had arrived defeated at Grand Central was further away, like an echo I still heard in the early mornings, but one that no longer defined me. Now I had a new rhythm. In the mornings, I taught at the community center. In the afternoons, I wrote in my notebook or accompanied one of the women to run errands. And at night, I shared stories with the tenants at the guest house. It wasn't a luxurious life, but it was mine, and that was enough. The book I had published began to circulate more than I ever imagined. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was passed from hand to hand among immigrant women, retired teachers, even young students who saw in my words an example of resilience. Often, they would come to the center with a used copy, full of notes and underlined passages, and ask me to sign it. The idea made me laugh. Me, who had been invisible for so many years, was now someone whose voice mattered. One of those afternoons, I received an unexpected invitation. A local university wanted me to participate in a conference on resilience in old age. I was scared. What could I possibly contribute to a room full of academics? But Sarah convinced me, "Grace, you don't need degrees. Your life is your credential." I accepted. The day of the conference, I walked onto the stage in my simplest dress and my pearl earrings. There were professors, students, journalists. I told my story without embellishments, without softening the cruelest parts. I spoke of being abandoned in a strange country, of the hunger, of the cold nights in the shelter, but also of how I found myself in the midst of that pain. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then a long applause. Someone shouted from the back, "Thank you for reminding us that there is always hope." That sentence stayed with me on my way back to the guest house. I walked with a glowing heart. I understood that I had not only survived, I had turned my wound into a beacon. As the months went by, the relationships at the community center grew even deeper. One afternoon, Fatima, the Dominican woman who had learned to write her son's name with me, brought me a small gift. A blue handkerchief she had embroidered herself. "So you never forget that you gave me back my dignity too," she said. I kept it like a treasure, more valuable than any jewel. That gesture confirmed that I had planted something that was blooming beyond me. At the same time, I began to receive letters from other women from different parts of the country. Some had read my story in the magazine. Others had heard of me through the consulate. They all said the same thing. I was abandoned too. My daughter doesn't speak to me anymore. I thought I was alone until I read your story. Each letter was a mirror of my pain, but also a confirmation that my voice had meaning. The memory of Jessica still appeared like a shadow in my memory. Sometimes I dreamed of her as a child, running through the house with her hands stained with yellow paint. I would wake up with tears, but no longer with a feeling of absolute emptiness. I knew I had lost something that would never return, but I also knew I had gained something I never imagined: my inner freedom. One day, I received an unexpected message from my granddaughter Chloe. "Grandma, I really want to see you. I want to travel to New York to meet you." I felt like my heart was going to explode. I replied with restrained excitement, "I'll be waiting for you with open arms, my daughter's daughter." That possibility filled me with hope. I didn't know if Jessica would allow it, but just the fact that my granddaughter sought my company confirmed that not all was lost in that branch of my bloodline. Autumn returned, and with it, new opportunities. I was asked to coordinate a digital literacy project for older women. I learned right alongside them how to use computers, send emails, and make video calls. The irony was palpable. I, who had been silenced so many times, was now teaching others to communicate with the world. In one of those classes, while helping a student open her first email account, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Mrs. Grace, today I feel like I've been born again. I felt reborn too." Every grateful face was a caress that erased the scars of abandonment a little more. As winter approached, I received another invitation, this time to participate in a local television program about stories of overcoming adversity. I hesitated, thinking of the exposure it would bring, but I accepted. The recording was simple. They asked me questions, and I answered truthfully. At the end, the host told me, "Mrs. Grace, your voice is necessary." That night, when the program aired, I received dozens of messages of support. Women I didn't know told me, "You gave me the strength to keep going," and I knew that all the pain I had lived through had found meaning in that echo. I never received another letter from Jessica. The silence became the final answer, but it no longer hurt as it once did. It was a silence that confirmed what I already knew. She had closed that door. I, on the other hand, had opened many others. In my notebook that night, I wrote, "Abandonment tried to bury me, but it didn't know I was a seed." Life at the guest house continued with its familiar rhythm. Maria treated me like a sister. Sometimes, over coffee, she would say, "My friend, you came here with eyes full of tears, and now they are full of light." And it was true. I had learned that life can break us, but it can also give us the chance to rebuild ourselves in a stronger, more authentic way. As the Christmas lights began to shine in the city again, I found myself standing in Times Square, looking up at the night sky. I felt an inner warmth that didn't come from any heater or coat, but from the certainty of having survived. I was no longer the abandoned woman. I was no longer the mother begging for love. I was Grace Peterson, a free woman, with her own voice and a path that no one else could decide for me. And in that moment, I understood that my reunion with life was the greatest victory of all. The third year in New York found me different from everything I had been before. I had stopped counting the days as if they were a sentence and began to feel them as gifts. My mornings were full of activity. Between workshops, talks, and classes, there was always someone waiting for me to learn, to listen, to share. And every person who touched my life was a reminder that there was still much to give. The book continued on its own journey. A larger publisher became interested in reissuing it with better distribution. I accepted in astonishment, and suddenly my words were traveling further than I had ever dared to imagine. I received messages from women in Argentina, Colombia, even from different parts of the United States. They all said the same thing. My story was also theirs. There were no borders for abandonment or for resilience. One day, I received an unexpected letter from San Antonio. It wasn't from Jessica, but from an old neighbor. She told me that the house where I had raised my daughter had been sold. Jessica had decided to get rid of everything that belonged to me. Reading it, I felt a blow to my chest, but I was immediately surprised by my own reaction. I no longer cried. I understood that that house was no longer my home. My true home was here, in every person who gave me a sincere hug, in every woman who wrote her first sentence, in every friend who joined me for coffee in a random square. The material things were gone, but the essential belonged to me, and no one could take it away. The greatest gift arrived months later, in the spring, when my granddaughter Chloe traveled to New York to see me. I waited for her at the airport, wearing my pearl earrings, my heart beating like a drum. When I saw her walk out with her suitcase, so young and so much like Jessica in her early years, tears blurred my vision. I ran to her, and we hugged as if trying to mend in a single gesture everything that had been denied to us. "Grandma," she said in my ear, "I thought I would never get the chance to truly know you." That moment became my greatest victory. I didn't need Jessica to come back or to apologize. I had my granddaughter, a bridge to the future, someone who wanted to know me unconditionally. We spent weeks exploring New York together. I showed her Central Park, Times Square, the museums. I told her my story with the calmness of someone who no longer seeks pity, but seeks to teach. And she listened attentively, with a respect that restored my faith in the blood we shared. One day, as we were walking down Broadway, she took my hand and said, "Grandma, you are not what Mom says you are. You are strong. You are my role model." Those words set me free. I understood that my legacy had not been lost, that even though my daughter had rejected me, my seed had sprouted in another generation. As time went on, the community center organized a large event to recognize the women who had contributed the most over the past year. To my surprise, they chose me as the main honoree. They gave me a public recognition, with flowers and applause. As I walked onto the stage, I felt that all my sacrifices, all the tears, all the lonely nights in that train station had led to this moment. I spoke from the heart. I told them I had been abandoned, humiliated, and scorned, but that I had found a new life because I dared not to give up. I said that dignity does not depend on others valuing us, but on us learning to value ourselves. When I finished, many women came up crying to hug me. I felt that the wound was closed, not because I had forgotten, but because I had transformed the pain into strength. That night, back at the guest house, Maria was waiting for me with a simple cake and a lit candle. All the women sang for me. I blew out the candle with my eyes closed and made a wish that no woman in the world would ever have to beg for love from those who should give it unconditionally. In my journal, I wrote, "The real comeback isn't having money or recognition or medals. The real comeback is looking in the mirror and recognizing yourself as someone worthy of love, even when that love doesn't come from where you expected it." Now, every time I walk through New York, I feel that my steps are firm, that I don't have to bow my head or ask for permission. I am free. I am my own person. I am the Grace who survived the cruelest betrayal and who chose to blossom on the most unexpected ground. Today, I want to say something to you who are listening. Life can hit you, tear away what you love, leave you on the street with an empty suitcase. But as long as you have the strength to breathe, you also have the opportunity to get up and build something new. I did it at 68, when everyone thought I was finished. If I could do it, you can too. The lesson of my life is this: never allow the abandonment of others to define your worth. You are worthy because of who you are, not because of what others decide to give you. And even though it hurts, even though it seems impossible, there is always a rebirth waiting at the end of the tunnel. Have you ever experienced or known someone who has gone through something similar? Answer me in the comments. I want to read your stories. And if this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it today.